Hello everyone and welcome to this week's edition of Women's World. After the unfortunate incident that took place yesterday in Abu Siffin Church in Giza Governorate, there were so many questions regarding the crisis management and volunteering and the social responsibility. Therefore, we decided to talk about these topics in this edition of the program today. And today we have with us over the phone Dr. Amira Sabak, Professor of Human Development. Dr. Amira, are you with us?
Yes, dear. Good afternoon to you and all your audience.
Good afternoon to you, Dr. Amira. The importance of crisis management in such difficult times.
Okay, crisis management in general is avoiding destruction. I mean, when a crisis management happens for any country or in any country, the most benefit that the country gets is to know the different phases of a crisis and how to deal with every crisis in each phase. Mm-hmm. Let us begin from the beginning. We have to admit that crisis management started from the Pharaonic era. Even the pharaohs knew how to deal with their crisis, and they were very clever at this. Then in Egypt, here in modern Egypt, we started to deal with crisis management as a soft skill for dealing with businesses. Mm-hmm. If we are going to talk about crisis management in a global level or in a bigger level, we can say that with the beginning of the Arab Spring phenomenon, there was a direct impact on several countries, including Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Syria.
Yes.
And the impact was related to several aspects of each country, mainly politics and the economy.
Yes.
So these countries were influenced by the Arab Spring, and businesses at that time were threatened by different factors that occurred due to abnormal reasons. And in order to have a chance to deal with these crises, each country needed to analyze the factors that might affect the business of this country and the government of this country in general, and prepare a plan to deal with each factor. Most countries were ready and were proactive to deal with these crises because they had a plan and they wanted to change a threat to an opportunity. So if we want to say what is the main benefit of crisis management, is turning a threat into an opportunity. So talking about this, crisis management helps businesses and countries to know what factors might have an impact on them and how to deal with them. Crisis management in general helps countries and businesses to learn from previous studies and to validate dealing with different situations according to lessons learned.
Yes.
And a good leader, whether to a business or to a country, needs to have the ability to take the right action when faced with a crisis, even if a plan was not prepared in advance. So leaders should be proactive. They should deal with any issue as a subject, not an object. They should have the mentality of using a very nice Chinese expression. Chinese created an expression that I really like called crisis unity. It is a mingle between crisis and opportunity. So now all leaders, whenever they are put in a crisis, they are focusing on changing this crisis into a crisis unity.
Okay, but let me stop you here, Dr. Amira, because I needed to understand exactly what you mean when you said that you need to deal with the matter as a subject, not an object.
Okay, now sometimes some leaders, some people, I cannot call leaders, whenever they are in a bad situation, they say, oh, we are a victim for this. So they are dealing with the situation as a doer, as the subject who is doing something, and they themselves as victims. If I'm going to deal with any crisis as a victim, this means I will never get out of it. Or even if I find a solution to get out of this, I'm getting out of the problem the way I used to be or less. But if I'm looking at the crisis, I say, okay, I'm very happy, or it's not very happy, but I'm facing a crisis like any other places. If I need to survive, I need to have the mentality or the mindset of changing this crisis into an opportunity. New governments now, new regulations now, new standards now in all governments are giving the skills of changing these crises into opportunities to the leaders.
Yes.
Facing our economic crisis, even facing our social crisis, even any kind of crisis, it needs skills. Leaders do not know every crisis that might influence the business or the country. So they need to have the right skill from the beginning to face a crisis and the right reaction. That's what I'm talking about. They need to be proactive. They need to be the subject, not the object. They need to lead the situation, not to allow the situation to lead them.
I see. Yes, that's the difference.
That's what I meant. Okay?
Okay, yes. And how can we turn a crisis into an opportunity? That's very challenging. And how can we raise awareness in this regard?
Okay, let's start again with the mindset that whenever crisis comes to me, it's an opportunity for me to go to an extra milestone. I mean, okay, now if all places, all countries, all communities are not facing crisis, we will be normal, we'll be regular. But crisis makes up people. If I want to deal with a crisis a country is in, I have to go through like 4 phases. Phase number 1 is mitigation. I have to create a risk management team from the beginning. I have to know, I have this risk management team, they need to study the social threats that they might face, the technological threats that they might face, the economic, the environmental, the political, the legal, all these are risks or all these are threats that I might face. So step number 1, I have to create a team or a risk management team to avoid the crisis. We have, and there should be someone in charge. If I face as a country or a business a crisis, I have number 1 to create a communication strategy for communicating with all parties and to determine the sources of information that I will use to solve this crisis and understand the budget, the areas, the expenses that I need to work on. After getting all this info, I will go to phase number 2, which is to be prepared, to put a step, to take action, to move. And if I want to move, I need to work on some policies to make sure that every step I'm taking is adjusted and is needed and is serving the big vision of the place, whatever
Okay,
it's a business or a country.
being prepared is what is termed as risk assessment?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
This is risk assessment. We're talking about being ready. This is called risk assessment,
yes,
right?
you can say it is risk assessment, which is a step before crisis management.
Yes, I was just going to ask about the importance of risk assessment in crisis management. So yes, yeah.
The importance of this assessment is to know where the gap is.
Yes.
To know what are the root causes. If I know the root cause, I will solve this problem or I will get out of this crisis and never fall in it again. But if this assessment helps me to get to the root cause, this means I can put a plan in place to hold meetings and to create a plan. And during that plan, I can put parameters for accessing any financial reserves, any support reserves that I need, any resources in general. And I can determine the options I have. After that, after having these options, through the communication with different parties, I can analyze all the implications, I can put contingency plans, I can implement a continuity plan, even with people who are working remotely. Because sometimes a crisis, I'm not inside the place, I might be remote. So there should be communication people who can communicate and give me information and take from me information. We cannot deny that through this time, people are facing a lot of stress. So part of dealing with crisis, I have to put in mind to deal with the stress of all stakeholders, all parties. I have to give them the information they need. I have to give them all the justification with what we are doing. Why? Because when the crisis, they have to begin with end in mind. They should know what they are going to. Okay, we are a crisis now, but if we follow step number 1 or 2 and 3, we are going to reach this end. So they will get motivated and they will understand why they are doing so. If you are not very transparent with people who are working with you in the same crisis, they will feel that they are living in ambiguity.
They are just taking orders and they are required to implement the orders and that's it. But if they understand...
They will not do by heart.
Yes.
Okay? So clarity and giving a lot of information is very important during crisis management if I really want good results. I have to support leaders. Now I'm talking about the leaders of crisis management. I have to support leaders and back them with decision making. So I cannot tell a leader, you have to deal with crisis unless I'm empowering him. I'm giving him the knowledge, the skills, the attitude, and the resources, and the empowerment, and
the training,
the responsibility to make decisions.
Of course, yes. And what's the importance of training in this regard, Dr. Amira?
Training makes people able to make decisions. Okay, when I'm in a crisis, it is extremely silly to go to a tall hierarchy to get a decision. But if I'm empowered and my leader made me trained and I got the skills of how to make a decision, I know how to document the crisis, I know to use my resources, I know to put different options, and I know the pros and cons of every option, and I dare make a decision. So it comes by saying, empowering people, them. I cannot delegate people without giving them the empowerment they need. I cannot delegate people without giving them the authority and the accountability to make decisions.
Yes, I see. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Amira Sabak, Professor of Human Development. Thank you very much for being with us. And now we're going to watch a special report about crisis management as well as volunteering in times of crisis. And we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
كل سحابة شايفين وراها شمس، النهاية شايفين وراها حياة، الحاجز شايفين وراه طريق، وورا كل باب مقفول شايفين بدايات جديدة. وكل مشكلة شايفين حلها. حياة كريمة لكل مصري، لكل مصرية. اتبرع على حساب حياة كريمة.
بعلم الوصول قلنا وكتبنا عهدنا هنعيش كلنا.
وأنني أعلن اليوم انطلاق هذا المشروع الطموح، تنمية الريف المصري حياة كريمة.
مصر في وقت الشدة قادرة تحضن ولادها وتعيد المشاهد بعلم الوصول.